Exhausted and desperate, Darian handed the keys of his only sanctuary to a shivering stranger wrapped in dirty rags. He thought he was saving a helpless homeless woman from the freezing city streets. He never expected she was a billionaire CEO, or that his simple act of kindness would completely upend his life. Darian checked his watch for the 15th time in 10 minutes. 7:42 p.m. The glaring red numbers on the terminal display mocked his mounting panic. His flight to Chicago was boarding at gate B12, and he was hopelessly marooned at the back of a stagnant security line at JFK International Airport. As a single father struggling to keep his head above water, this trip wasn't just another routine business excursion. It was a lifeline. Darian ran a small, struggling architectural design firm. After months of cold calls and rejections, he had finally secured a pitch meeting with a major Chicago developer. Landing this contract meant paying off the suffocating mountain of medical debt left behind by his late wife's illness. More importantly, it meant his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe, wouldn't have to be pulled out of the specialized charter school she loved so much. "Please," Darian whispered to the universe, nervously shifting his battered leather briefcase from one hand to the other. "Just let the line move." But the universe was not in a cooperative mood. By the time Darian finally shoved his shoes back on and sprinted down the concourse, his lungs burning and his tie askew, it was 8:05 p.m. He rounded the corner to gate B12 just in time to see the gate agent sharply pull the heavy jet bridge door shut. "Wait!" Darian shouted, rushing the desk. "I'm here! I'm on that flight!" The agent offered a practiced, unsympathetic smile. "I'm sorry, sir. The boarding door is closed. Federal regulations prohibit us from reopening it once secured." "You don't understand," Darian pleaded, his voice cracking with a mixture of exhaustion and despair. "My entire livelihood depends on being in Chicago by tomorrow morning. I have to be on that plane. The next available flight with open seats isn't until tomorrow at 1 p.m., the agent replied, typing briskly on her keyboard. "I can put you on standby for the 5 a.m. flight, but it's heavily overbooked." Defeated, Darian nodded. He accepted the standby ticket and dragged his feet away from the gate. He felt completely hollowed out. Chloe was safely staying with his mother across the bridge in New Jersey for the weekend, but the weight of letting her down crushed him. He had booked a cheap room at the airport hotel so he could be ready for the 5 a.m. standby, but his mind was racing too fast for sleep. He needed air. He needed to escape the claustrophobic hum of the terminal. Pulling his heavy wool coat tightly around himself, Darian walked out of the sliding glass doors into the bitter, biting chill of a late December night in New York. The wind was howling, cutting through his clothes like icy razors. He decided to walk to a small, 24-hour diner he knew just off the airport perimeter, hoping a bad cup of coffee would help him figure out a backup plan. That was when he saw her. Tucked into a darkened alcove near a subway ventilation grate, a woman was huddled on the frozen concrete. She was swallowed up by an oversized, filthy olive-green trench coat that looked like it had been pulled from a dumpster. Her head was bowed, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees to conserve whatever meager body heat she had left. In a city like New York, people walked past the unhoused every single day. Usually, Darian would offer a sympathetic glance or $1 if he had cash. But tonight, broken by his own failure and highly sensitive to the cruelty of the world, he couldn't just keep walking. The temperature was projected to drop to 10 degrees. She wouldn't survive the night out here. Darian approached slowly. "Excuse me?" he said softly. The woman flinched, her head snapping up. Beneath the smudges of dirt and the tangled, matted mess of dark hair, Darian was startled by her eyes. They were a piercing, striking shade of ice blue. Despite the bruise swelling on her left cheekbone and the split on her lower lip, there was an unmistakable sharpness in her gaze. It wasn't the vacant look of someone lost to addiction or madness. It was the hyper-vigilant glare of a cornered animal. "I don't have any money," she rasped, her voice trembling from the cold. "I'm not asking for money," Darian said gently, keeping his distance to show he wasn't a threat. "I was just heading to the diner across the street. You look like you're freezing. Can I buy you something hot to eat?" She stared at him, assessing him with a calculating intensity that felt entirely out of place for someone sleeping on a grate. Finally, her shoulders slumped, the sheer exhaustion overriding her caution. "Coffee, black, and whatever soup they have." 10 minutes later, they were sitting in a quiet booth at the back of the neon-lit diner. The woman had devoured a bowl of chicken noodle soup with desperate speed, though she managed to keep her manners surprisingly refined. She held the spoon properly, dabbing her mouth with a paper napkin after every few bites. "I'm Darian," he offered, wrapping his hands around his own mug of coffee. "Stacy," she replied quietly. "Is there a shelter you can get to, Stacy? It's supposed to drop below freezing tonight." A bitter, cynical smile touched her lips. "The shelters are full. And even if they weren't, I wouldn't be safe there." Darian frowned. "Are you running from someone?" Stacy looked away, her jaw tightening. "You could say that. I had a disagreement with some people I trusted. They made sure I ended up with nothing. No ID, no money, no phone. I've been walking for 2 days." Darian studied her. She was articulate, guarded, and carried a strange aura of authority despite her tattered clothes. A crazy, reckless idea began to form in his mind. He thought of his cozy, empty apartment in Queens. He thought of the heavy brass key sitting in his coat pocket. He was staying at the airport hotel tonight. His apartment would be empty until tomorrow evening at the earliest, assuming he didn't make the standby flight. "Look," Darian began, rubbing his temples. "I'm going to do something incredibly stupid. My friends would tell me I'm out of my mind." Stacy raised an eyebrow. "Usually, when men say that to me, it's followed by a proposition I have to forcefully decline." Darian actually laughed, a short, tired sound. "Nothing like that. I live in Queens. My daughter is with her grandmother in New Jersey, and I am stuck at an airport hotel waiting for a 5 a.m. flight. My apartment is completely empty." He reached into his pocket and placed his spare key on the Formica table between them. Next to it, he placed a crisp $50 bill. "Take a cab. The address is on the back of the keychain. Go there, lock the door, turn up the heat, and get some sleep. There's food in the fridge and clean clothes in my closet." Stacy stared at the key as if it were a loaded weapon. "You're giving the key to your home to a homeless stranger you met 20 minutes ago." "You don't belong on the streets, Stacy. I don't know your story, and I won't ask. Just don't pawn my daughter's television, okay?" For the first time, the hardened exterior of the woman cracked. Her blue eyes welled with tears, though she fought fiercely to hold them back. She reached out with a trembling hand and closed her dirt-stained fingers over the cold metal key. "I will never forget this, Darian." The cab ride to Queens felt like a hallucination to Stacy Kensington. As she watched the city lights blur through the smudged window of the taxi, she clutched Darian's key so tightly it left deep indentations in her palm. Just 72 hours ago, she had been sitting in the penthouse boardroom of Kensington Global, a multi-billion-dollar telecommunications empire she had built from the ground up. She was preparing for the largest merger in the company's history, but she had gravely underestimated the greed of her fiancé and chief financial officer, Richard Belmont. Richard had discovered that Stacy planned to cancel the merger after finding irregularities in the partner company's offshore accounts. Knowing the cancellation would ruin his massive under-the-table payout, Richard had acted swiftly. A drugged glass of wine at dinner, waking up in a moving van, being thrown violently into a dark alley in an unfamiliar, dangerous borough, her designer clothes stripped, replaced with filthy rags, her purse, her biometric security phone, her platinum cards, all gone. Richard knew that without her retina scan and encrypted passcodes, Stacy couldn't access any of her funds or prove her identity quickly. He only needed her out of the way for 4 days to force the merger through via proxy, claiming she had suffered a sudden nervous breakdown and retreated to a private rehab facility. When the cab pulled up to the modest brick apartment building in Queens, Stacy used Darian's $50 to pay the fare. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs, her body aching from the bruises Richard's thugs had left on her. She turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. The apartment was small, slightly cluttered, but incredibly warm. It smelled of cinnamon and floor wax. Children's drawings, brightly colored crayon depictions of suns and stick figures, were magneted to the refrigerator. Framed photos lined the hallway. Darian smiling widely, holding a little girl with missing front teeth. Stacy locked the deadbolt behind her and leaned against the door, finally letting out a ragged, shaking breath. For the first time in 3 days, she was safe. She walked into the bathroom and turned the shower on as hot as she could stand it. As she washed the grime and dried blood from her skin, the billionaire CEO wept. She wept for the betrayal of the man she thought she loved, and she wept in overwhelming gratitude for a stranger who had looked at a woman in the gutter and seen a human being. After stepping out of the shower, Stacy found a pair of Darian's clean sweatpants and a thick flannel shirt in his bedroom. They hung off her slender frame, but they were soft and smelled like clean laundry. Her survival instincts, honed in the cutthroat world of corporate takeovers, began to kick back in. She walked into the small living room and spotted Darian's laptop sitting on a desk. She opened it. It was password protected. Stacy looked around the room. She noticed a calendar on the wall. A specific date was circled in bright red marker with the words, Chloe's birthday, scribbled next to it. August 14th. She typed Chloe 0814 into the password prompt. Access granted. Stacy immediately opened an incognito browser and accessed a deeply hidden, encrypted server she used strictly for corporate espionage and internal audits. She typed out a rapid, coded message to the only person at Kensington Global she knew she could trust with her life, her senior legal counsel, Thomas. She gave him the address of Darian's apartment and instructed him to bring a clean phone, her secondary passport, and an emergency cash reserve. Do not trust Richard, she typed. Initiate protocol blackout. She hit send, erased her browsing history, and closed the laptop. Exhausted, she curled up on Darian's living room sofa, pulling a woven throw blanket over herself, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Meanwhile, back at JFK, Darian's luck had gone from bad to non-existent. The 5 a.m. standby flight was completely full. The 1 p.m. flight was abruptly cancelled due to a mechanical failure. By 3 p.m., his client in Chicago had called, furiously cancelling the pitch altogether and awarding the contract to a rival firm. Crushed under the weight of his ruined career, Darian took the subway back to Queens. He felt like an utter failure. To make matters worse, as he trudged up the stairs to his apartment, the memory of what he had done the night before hit him with a fresh wave of panic. He had given a random homeless woman the key to his home. He fully expected to walk in and find his television gone, his drawers ransacked, and the place trashed. He pushed the door open slowly. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing slightly. The apartment was silent. But it wasn't trashed. In fact, it was immaculate. The clutter on the kitchen counter had been organized. The floors were swept. The faint smell of roasted garlic and herbs hung in the air. A pot of fresh pasta sauce was simmering on the stove on low heat. "Stacy?" Darian walked cautiously into the living room. She was gone. But on the coffee table, neatly arranged, sat his spare brass key. Next to it was a heavy, sleek black card. It had no bank logo, no name, and no account numbers. The only thing printed on the matte black titanium surface was a single silver phone number on the back. Beneath the card was a handwritten note on a piece of his daughter's construction paper. Darian picked it up, his hands shaking slightly as he read the elegant, sweeping cursive script. "Darian, you saved my life. I had to leave quickly to reclaim what is mine. But I will not forget the man who gave me his key when I had nothing. When you need a door opened, call the number on the card. S.K." The following 3 weeks were the darkest of Darian Hayes' life. The fallout from the cancelled Chicago pitch was catastrophic. Without the influx of cash from that contract, his small architectural firm was forced into bankruptcy. He had to lay off his 2 loyal employees, pack up his rented office space, and bring his drafting tables back to his cramped apartment in Queens. Worse still were the envelopes. They arrived daily, bearing the distinctive logo of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. The medical debts from his late wife's brutal, unsuccessful battle with leukemia had finally been handed over to aggressive collection agencies. Every time the phone rang, Darian's stomach twisted into a knot. He was skipping meals to ensure Chloe had enough fresh groceries, and the crushing weight of his failure was beginning to show in the dark circles under his eyes and his hollowed cheeks. Through it all, the heavy black titanium card sat on his nightstand. He would often stare at it under the dim light of his bedside lamp. When you need a door opened, call the number. He had nearly dialed it a dozen times, but his pride always stopped him. What could a woman who was sleeping on a subway grate realistically do for him? Yes, she had left a sleek card and possessed an undeniably commanding aura. But perhaps it was all a delusion, the tragic fantasy of a broken woman running from a dangerous past. He couldn't bring himself to intrude on whatever fragile life she was piecing back together. Darian had no idea that while he was drowning in debt, Stacy Kensington was orchestrating one of the most ruthless corporate takedowns in Wall Street history. 80 stories above Manhattan, in the gleaming glass spire of Kensington Global at Hudson Yards, Richard Belmont was celebrating. The grand mahogany boardroom was filled with high-powered executives, and a bottle of expensive champagne had just been popped. Richard, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit, smiled handsomely at the representatives of the rival telecommunications firm. The merger was moments away from being finalized. "To the future," Richard toasted, raising his crystal flute. He had spun a masterful, tragic tale to the board of directors. Stacy, he claimed, had suffered a catastrophic mental break from the stress of her position. She was currently in a secure, private psychiatric facility in Switzerland, unreachable and unfit to govern. As her fiancé and CFO, he had been granted emergency proxy. Once the ink dried on this merger, his hidden offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands would swell by nearly $80 million. "To the future," the executives echoed. Richard uncapped his gold Mont Blanc pen and reached for the signature line on the master contract. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open with such force that they slammed violently against the paneled walls. The room fell dead silent. Stacy Kensington stood in the doorway. She was no longer the shivering, bruised woman in a dumpster-salvaged coat. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, charcoal-grey Armani suit, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek, unforgiving chignon. The bruises on her face had faded to faint yellow shadows, expertly concealed by makeup, but the ice-blue fire in her eyes was more terrifying than ever. Flanking her was Thomas, her fiercely loyal senior legal counsel, and two plain-clothes detectives from the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit. Richard's face drained of all color. The Mont Blanc pen slipped from his fingers, clattering against the polished mahogany table. "Stacy," he choked out, his voice a barely audible squeak. You're supposed to be in Geneva." "I prefer the climate in Queens, Richard," Stacy said, her voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. She walked slowly to the head of the table. The silence was absolute. No one dared to breathe. "What is the meaning of this?" one of the rival executives demanded, standing up. "Richard, you said she was incapacitated." "He lied," Thomas interjected smoothly, dropping a massive binder of financial documents onto the table. "Mr. Belmont orchestrated a kidnapping and attempted to forcibly disappear Ms. Kensington to push through this illegal merger. Furthermore, this binder contains undeniable proof of Mr. Belmont embezzling corporate funds through a shell company known as Sterling Developments in Chicago." At the mention of Sterling Developments, Richard's knees gave out. He collapsed back into his leather chair, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. The detectives stepped forward, handcuffs clinking, as they pulled Richard's arms behind his back. Stacy leaned over the table, bringing her face inches from the man who had tried to destroy her. "You took my phone, my money, and my coat, Richard," she whispered, her tone laced with absolute venom. "But you forgot that I built this empire with my own 2 hands. You are nothing but a parasite. Enjoy federal prison." As Richard was hauled away in disgrace, Stacy turned to the shocked executives. "This merger is officially cancelled. If any of you wish to challenge me, my legal team is ready. Now get out of my boardroom." A week later, Darian was sitting at his kitchen table, staring blankly at a bright pink eviction notice taped to his front door. He had exactly 14 days to vacate the apartment. He looked at Chloe, who was sitting on the living room rug, happily coloring a picture of a dinosaur, completely oblivious to the fact that they were about to lose their home. Tears pricked Darian's eyes. He had failed her. He had completely failed. Desperation finally overriding his pride, Darian walked into his bedroom, picked up his cell phone, and grabbed the black titanium card. His hands were shaking as he dialed the silver number on the back. It rang twice. "Kensington Executive Office," a polished, professional female voice answered. Darian cleared his throat, feeling foolish. Hello. My name is Darian Hayes. I was given this card by a woman named Stacy. She told me to call if I needed a door opened." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the rapid clicking of a keyboard. Then, the receptionist's tone shifted from professional to incredibly deferential. "Mr. Hayes, we have been waiting for your call. Ms. Kensington has instructed us to accommodate you immediately. Can you be at the Kensington Global Headquarters at Hudson Yards in 1 hour? A private car is already en route to your address." The sleek black town car dropped Darian off at the base of a towering, ultra-modern skyscraper in Hudson Yards. He stepped out onto the pavement, clutching his battered leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. He felt entirely out of place in his off-the-rack suit, surrounded by the bustling elite of Manhattan's financial district. He approached the reception desk in the cavernous, marble-clad lobby. Before he could even state his name, the head of security stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, right this way, sir. Miss Kensington is expecting you." Darian was escorted to a private, glass-walled elevator that shot up to the 80th floor. His ears popped. His mind was racing, trying to piece together how the destitute woman he had fed at a diner could possibly be connected to a multi-billion-dollar telecommunications empire. Did she work here? Was she a high-end fixer? The elevator doors glided open, revealing a breathtaking penthouse suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. At the center of the room, standing behind a massive, custom-built desk of petrified wood, was Stacy. Darian stopped dead in his tracks. He recognized the piercing blue eyes immediately, but everything else was a staggering transformation. She radiated absolute power and elegance. "Hello, Darian," Stacy said, a warm, genuine smile breaking through her formidable executive exterior. She walked around the desk and extended her hand. Darian shook it, entirely bewildered. "Stacy? You're the CEO of Kensington Global," she finished for him, gesturing toward a plush seating area. "Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? You bought me the best cup of coffee I've ever had in my life. It's the least I can do." Darian sat heavily on a white leather sofa. "I don't understand. Why were you on the street? Why did you need my apartment?" Over the next 20 minutes, Stacy explained everything. She told him about Richard's betrayal, the drugging, the alleyway, and the desperate bid to steal her company. She explained how Darian's simple, unconditional act of kindness had given her the safe harbor she needed to access her encrypted servers and summon her legal team to launch a counteroffensive. If I had frozen to death on that grate, or if I hadn't been able to contact Thomas in time, Richard would have destroyed my life's work, Stacy said, leaning forward, her eyes locked onto his. "You saved me, Darian. Not just my company, but my life." Darian shook his head, still processing the shock. I just gave you a key. Anyone would have done it." "No, Darian, they wouldn't have. Dozens of people walked past me that night. You were the only one who stopped." Stacy's gaze then drifted down to Darian's battered briefcase. "But I didn't bring you here just to say thank you. I ran a background check on you, Darian. I know about your firm. I know about the medical debt from your wife's treatments at Sloan Kettering. And I know about the Chicago pitch you missed because you were stuck at the airport." Darian winced, looking away. "That pitch was my last chance. My firm is bankrupt. I'm facing eviction. I called the number because I need a job. Anything. A drafting assistant, a consultant. I just need to keep my daughter in her school." "You missed that flight to Chicago," Stacy said softly. "Do you know the name of the developer you were supposed to pitch to?" "Sterling Developments," Darian replied, confused. Stacy pulled a pristine manila folder from her desk and slid it across the coffee table toward him. Sterling Developments was a fraudulent shell company created by my ex-fiancé, Richard, to launder embezzled money. The FBI raided their Chicago offices 4 days ago. If you had made that flight and signed a contract with them, your firm would have been implicated in a federal money laundering syndicate. Your assets would have been frozen, and you would be facing criminal conspiracy charges. The blood drained from Darian's face. The very disaster that had ruined him, missing the flight, had actually been a miracle in disguise. It had saved him from total destruction. "Darian," Stacy continued, her voice commanding yet gentle, "Kensington Global is expanding. We are building a massive, state-of-the-art tech campus in Austin, Texas. It's a $2 billion project. I just fired the lead architectural firm this morning because they were loyal to Richard." She tapped the manila folder. Inside this folder is a contract making Darian Hayes Associates the sole lead architect for the Austin campus. The retainer fee alone is $5 million, payable today. Darian stared at the folder, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He couldn't breathe. "Stacy, My firm is just me right now. I don't have the manpower." "You will by tomorrow," she assured him with a confident smile. "Hire whoever you need. Rent whatever office space you want. Furthermore, my legal team has already contacted Memorial Sloan Kettering and the collection agencies. Your medical debts have been settled in full. They no longer exist." Tears, hot and fast, spilled over Darian's eyelashes. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the sheer, overwhelming release of years of terror and grief. He wasn't going to lose his daughter. He wasn't going to lose his home. He had been drowning for so long, and suddenly he was pulled onto solid ground. Stacy moved to the sofa, sitting beside him. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, her touch a stark contrast to the cold, calculating CEO she presented to the world. "You gave a freezing stranger the key to your home, Darian. Now, I am giving you the key to your future." Months later, Darian stood on a balcony overlooking the bustling construction site in Austin, Texas. Beside him stood Chloe, wearing a tiny yellow hard hat that made her giggle. She was holding tightly to Stacy's hand, pointing excitedly at the massive cranes lifting steel beams into the sky. Darian looked at the two of them, the billionaire and the little girl, laughing together in the warm Texas sun. He smiled, realizing that sometimes the greatest twists of fate aren't the flights we miss, but the people we find when we stop running and choose to be kind. Did this incredible story of fate, kindness, and dramatic twists keep you on the edge of your seat? Sometimes, a single act of compassion can completely change the trajectory of your life. If you loved this story, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that good things happen. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, real-life inspired dramas.